Hello, everyone. I wanted to thank you for attending the webinar today. Unfortunately, we had a problem with recording, so I'm going to go ahead and do a voiceover with the PowerPoint now. Hopefully this will record and you can view it later. We were talking about co-teaching and how to build that great oneness that we're all looking for. And the goals for today were to define the parameters of effective co-teaching, that was a language objective, and also a content objective was to identify a co-teaching model based on the student's needs or the content complexity or the stage of development of the lesson plan itself. We want to steer clear of selecting a model for co-teaching based on teacher comfort level. We want to make sure we're basing it on the student's needs and not the teacher's needs. So what are the parameters of co-teaching? Well, we want to be able to plan, instruct, assess, and reflect. Of course, today's session is based on instruction only. We did touch on the other parts. Certainly, it's all part of co-teaching. You have to be involved in the planning stage. You have to be involved in assessment and reflection. But today's session certainly was focused on the instruction. How do you tease apart those nuts and bolts? What do we do when we're in the classroom? The goal of co-teaching is to have each teacher serve as a content area teacher and also a specialist teacher. We want the ESL teacher to be knowledgeable of the content, but in many cases, the ESL teacher is trying to go into a classroom where he or she is not content certified. And we talked about that, as several people mentioned, that they were working on building strength in the content area. At the same token, I think that the content teacher needs to build their strength on the language side so that we can work together more effectively. We both need to have both sides of that one coin. That's very important. But again, that's the ultimate goal. We talked a little bit about student needs and how to select a model of instruction based on student needs. Well, we have to consider things like the increased differentiation needs, remediation, whether we have behavior problems or classroom management issues in the classroom, and whether students need to build background. For example, if we are discussing a student who, let's say, has interrupted formal education and they need to build background, perhaps we would need at least one or two groups for that. On the other hand, if students in the classroom are advanced ELs and they could integrate seamlessly with the native speakers because they have basic language skills, and we're only talking about developing their academic language, then we might very well be able to just use multiple groups. Then again, if we are talking about a very somewhat complex structure, but only one structure of the content is complex, but only one teacher is content certified, we may need to initially have sort of the one group models that we will discuss in a moment here. Teacher complexity, content complexity and teacher intent is also very, very important. Again, we're talking about the Pythagorean theorem in the 8th grade math class, and the EL teacher is not certified in math. Well, if this is an initial lesson, then I would recommend one whole group setting for that. But if both teachers were content certified, we could move on to two groups or perhaps even multiple groups. The stage of development, this is pretty much self-explanatory. There's a time and a place for each of these group settings, whether it's one or two or multiple groups. There's a time and a place for all of it, depending on the stage of the lesson development. Here's a listing, tried to code it a little bit, of all the different types of lessons that you could have, or the configurations for the teaching models. Again, these one group lessons are for introduction and review. Two groups are for remediation. Multiple groups are when you want to extend, when you want to facilitate, when you want to have project-based learning. These are all very important. Let's see, I'm going to go on through here. We talked about this. This is a one group lesson, so this would be an initial lesson, but you can see from the graphic how the ESL teacher is supporting and not leading the classroom. Perhaps this ESL teacher doesn't have content skill, but again, they are in the lesson with the ELs and they are learning as they go. We also talked about having a language objective posted. It's very important, as important as the content objective, making sure that your voice is heard. Again, with the one group, we talked about the fact that even though you're sort of a tag teaming here, teaching seamlessly, and you have that lesson plan, you may also need to get yourself 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of class to address that language objectives and to talk about what is required with language that particular day. If you have intermediate and advanced students, perhaps you're working on a reading or a writing goal, but if you have, an objective, but if you have intensive students, perhaps it's just a listening or a speaking objective. And yes, that also applies to native speakers. You want them to have the same language goals because on the Georgia milestones, they'll be required to write and explain their answers as well. They certainly need to be able to speak in complete sentences and use the academic vocabulary. So really all students can benefit from having you in that classroom. One group here, again, one teacher is teaching, one assesses. This is probably my least favorite model of instruction because I feel sometimes relegated to a para role where or perhaps I'm just a disciplinarian for the day. It's important to assess. I don't want to minimize the importance of this particular model. It's simply my least favorite, and so I use it less than the others because again, I don't think it makes me an effective teacher, but there is a point in time where I can target an intervention. I'm trying to assess where students are, whether they're participating in class. I'm trying to determine what the next grouping should be. And at that point in time, I do need to take a step back and allow the content area teacher to focus on the lesson while I observe and take an informal assessment. Here you can see by the fact that it says ABC and ABC, the groups are heterogeneous. You can do it either way, but you want to make sure the groups are the same and they're split based on ability level and not necessarily on language level. I find that grouping to be really important so that it does not stigmatize ESL students. Oh, they have to go with the ESL teacher and we get to stay with the content area teacher. I don't want that mindset to set in, so we certainly split them. I shared with you that once or maybe even twice, we did have a situation where I took a group of students across the hall. It worked because the teacher and I had established clear content and language objectives, and the teacher ended up leaning on me a little bit for those language objectives, and because of that, I thought it was really pretty much a turning point because after that, then she relied on me a whole lot more because she understood the value in what I was teaching. So in that instant, it worked, and it had to be split into 2 classrooms only because we both needed to have access to the smartboard at the time. So, but that was the only, just once or twice I had to do it that way. This is a 2-group model. In this 2-group model, again, you have one pre-teaching and one teaching alternative information. Perhaps they're extending the lesson, enhancing it in some way, taking a virtual field trip. There are many things you can do. If you have one group of students who need to build background while another group of students needs to delve deeper into the content. So we certainly use this model quite a bit. Here, sometimes it is the ESL students that are split apart. Sometimes that just has to be done, especially if you're dealing with students who, again, have interrupted formal education, then I certainly use that model of instruction. Multiple groups. This is the grouping that most administrators really want to see because it shows the most diversity in the classroom. You have your differentiation going on, you have your technology happening, and certainly there's remediation going on, and all sorts of things. It's just a hodgepodge of student needs being met, which is great, but it can't always be this. If you have a very complex topic, your initial lesson cannot be just cooperative grouping. You have to, at some point, give a mini lesson so that everyone has a basic level of understanding of what is to come. They have to receive their instructions, so there, at some point there has to be a whole group instruction. Now, you don't have to stay in one group or in one model of instruction for the day or for the week. You can change it within the day. You can change it within the week. It all depends on what you need, what the students need, what the complexity of the material requires, and the lesson stage of development. That's really what you want to focus on. Again, here's another way to have multiple groups where both teachers are sort of just facilitating or monitoring all around the room. So our suggestion was that you take this information and you take it with you to your collaborative teacher, and the two of you sit down and you discuss what the students' needs are, what the content complexity is, and what the stage of lesson development is, and together you come to a consensus as to what model of instruction is needed. Another thing you could do, Jennifer Pendergrass, our vice president, pointed out that she took 5 minutes. She would ask for 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of a lesson, and that's where she would address her language needs. She would also have these, what she called courageous conversations, where she would sit down with the teacher if collaboration wasn't going so well, and she would discuss what needed to happen. So get yourself 5 minutes and make sure you have those courageous discussions. Certainly use these models of instruction to help you. You want to be dynamic and adaptable, but you want to make sure that your voice is getting in there, is being heard, that you're doing what needs to be done to facilitate helping your students. There are some barriers to co-teaching that we all know, we all discuss, and we all need to make sure that we minimize these barriers where we can by either discussing them with administrators or with our co-teachers. And speaking of the co-teachers, we certainly need to build the trust and rapport that we have with them so that we can have a school year that runs smoothly. So again, I just wanted to thank you so much for attending today. Sorry something went wrong with the recording, but we'll get this information to you. Hopefully you find it useful, and hopefully you agree to attend another Georgia TESOL webinar. Thank you so much.